Jerry Askin, who was in the courtroom when this verdict came down, is outside for us now. And Jerry, give us a report.
Hey, Joe. Kim, good evening. Good evening. Yes, I just walked out the federal building literally about 2 minutes ago. I can tell you inside the courtroom, there really wasn't a lot of emotion from what I could see. Tyre's mom walked inside the courtroom and really just kind of held her head down as the verdict was being read. Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith, those officers really showed no emotion as the verdict was read. You all mentioned the verdict a few minutes ago, but as you can recall, perhaps Tadarius Bean and Justin Smith, the jurors found them not guilty on most charges because they were the ones seen on video, more so holding Tyre Nichols down and not seeing with that fatal kick and those punches like the other officers were seeing in that baton. So any minute now we can expect for the family of Tyre Nichols to walk out of the federal court building here. We hope to hear from them any minute now. The officers will also walk out and because they will be sentenced at a later date. The judge could choose to hold them, but they could be sentenced at a later date. But this all happening literally after 19 days of this federal trial, 28 witnesses. The prosecution called 19 witnesses, the defense called 9. No officer in this trial testified in their own defense. And if you can recall, as you may have mentioned, Emmett Martin III and Desmond Mills Jr., those officers who pled guilty in this case, they did actually testify against the other officers, saying that excessive force was used. As a matter of fact, Desmond Mills, one officer, he testified saying that he lied about what happened in the whole assault because he wanted to keep his job. He lied about it because he said he had a special needs child and he wanted the insurance. Yeah, Emmett Martin III, actually the officer Emmett Martin III, he said he wanted revenge. He said he was angry. So many officers on that Scorpion team testified in this case. So right now we're monitoring to see who may come out. But again, Tadarius Bean, Justin Smith, and Demetrius Haley, that verdict came down literally in the past 10 minutes or so. Now, the jury began deliberations around 10:15 this morning. Around 4:20 or so, we got the word that they reached a verdict. Prosecutors the whole time made the point that the juror, that Tyre Nichols was beaten by all 5 officers and that they lied about it to cover it up. And this whole time, Tyre Nichols never posed a threat. The defense, however, they claim that it wasn't clear if Tyre was armed after he ran away from that initial traffic stop. This happening back on January 7th of 2023. We also know that Tyre died from blunt force trauma to his head. The medical examiner said his cause of death was a homicide. So right now, any minute now, I can also tell you attorney Benjamin Crump is inside the courtroom right now with the family of Tyre Nichols. Also, for the past few days, we've seen more supporters show up here. Representative Justin J. Pearson was also here praying with the family. We've seen G.A. Hardaway here also praying with the family. Pastor Earl Fisher, many pastors here hoping for justice. I did see a few of the supporters inside the courtroom kind of hold their head down when those not guilty verdicts came down for Tadarius Bean and for Justin Smith. You can imagine upset. Perhaps they all wanted a guilty verdict. So I'm just kind of watching to see who comes out the court building here because we definitely want to get that reaction and sound when those officers come out and when the family of Tyre Nichols come out as well. It's also worth to mention that Tyre's mom has been here every day at this trial. We're talking 19 days in this trial. The only day that she wasn't here. Okay, go ahead, Justin. Go ahead, Joe.
Excuse me, Jerry, we're just curious. Have you heard anything? And I know that Desmond Mills and Emmett Martin III, the 2 officers who pleaded, the 2 former officers who pleaded guilty, they still have to be sentenced as well, right?
Correct. And we are still waiting to find out when that date could be. We're also waiting to see when Tadarius Bean, Justin Smith, and Demetrius Haley could be sentenced also. So we're just kind of waiting and watching to see when this all could happen. Typically, even after they're found guilty, perhaps, and convicted, it could take up to 90 days before they're actually sentenced. So it's not clear if for sure they will be in holding today or if these 3 officers will get to go home and then come back at a later date for sentencing.
Jerry, after you heard all the testimony and saw all the video and heard the case from start to finish and then heard the defense, which must have been quite vigorous to get the verdict that we're getting today, what is your reaction to the verdicts?
You know, I have to say, hearing that Tadarius Bean and Justin Smith actually got that not guilty verdict, on most of those charges, I don't want to say that I'm so much surprised, but I will say that they were the ones seen on video holding Tyre down. They did throw a few punches, according to the FBI and statements that were in the court, but it was perhaps Demetrius Haley seen on video kicking Tyre, who sent those pictures, witnesses say, to friends and people of that bloody Tyre Nichols. So I am in no way personally, as a journalist here who covered this trial, surprised to hear of Demetrius Haley's guilty verdict on all counts. Justin Smith and Tadarius Bean, what happened, let's all admit it wasn't right. But Justin Smith and Tadarius Bean, I'm not as surprised to hear that most of their charges came back not guilty. And I want to also mention this too. The attorney for Justin Smith, Martin Zumach, and the attorney for the other officer, Tadarius Bean, they brought in a lot of character witnesses who really painted a picture of them being good officers, good friends, and perhaps that helped paint the picture for the jury as real people. Justin Smith, they mentioned, was a father. They mentioned Tadarius Bean. Someone came in and said that he was a good man. He was by the book, how he had an actual police vehicle, but he took it home. But he wouldn't drive that vehicle to McDonald's or to Walmart because he was just a by-the-book type of guy, and he never was the kind of guy that would do anything wrong. So I'm not surprised to hear Tadarius Bean and Justin Smith getting those lower charges.
All right. So I guess that my question is, who showed up in the videos the most? Was it the two officers who pleaded guilty? Or who showed up the most being violent, do you think? Was it the two officers who pleaded guilty and testified against the other three?
Most definitely. Emmett Martin III and Desmond Mills were the most in that video. Emmett Martin III was seen in that video punching Tyre, kicking Tyre multiple times. Desmond Mills used his baton on Tyre, and Justin Smith's attorney actually made the point several times that Desmond Mills was the only officer with a free hand at the time. They claimed Justin Smith and Demetrius Haley were all trying to hold him down and things like that, but it was Desmond Mills who had a free hand to try to handcuff Tyre Nichols. Third was Demetrius Haley. He was the one seen in that video kicking Tyre, as well. So I would have to take him, Demetrius Haley, Emmett Martin III, and Desmond Mills. As we know, Desmond Mills was the first officer to plead guilty on those federal charges. And then you've got Emmett Martin III, who pled guilty weeks before this trial started.
All right.
Okay. Jerry, we're hearing that all three officers are being taken into custody by federal officers.
That's right, and we understand that the sentencing will come in January 22nd, 2025. So that is going to be literally 2 years after Tyre's death. The sentencing will be decided by Judge Mark Norris, and a whole lot of effort is going to be put into that decision.
What would be the possible sentences these officers would face, Jerry? Do you know?
Well, they could face up to life in prison. Now, we're still working to get a breakdown of how all these charges play out. This is all live and breaking right now. But we do know, at least for Demetrius Haley, this could be life in prison. With it being a lesser included charge on some of these counts and whatnot, we would have to kind of break it all down. But I know when this whole thing first started, they could get life in prison. And don't forget, there's also a state trial that could happen as well. All 5 officers charged with second-degree murder on the state level. So we're, waiting and watching to see a date when that could happen, and we're seeing if that time will be served consecutively. So this is all breaking right now. We don't have a set timeline on how much time will be served and all that for each officer, but that's a question we're going to definitely keep asking.
We probably should go over these the verdict to get. I'm sorry.
Go out.
I'm sorry. What were you saying, Jerry? My apologies.
I'm just turning around to see when.
Okay.
Turning around to see when Tyre's mom and his family might come out. Also, Benjamin Crump is here. Representative Justin J. Pearson is here. Newly elected General Sessions Court Clerk Tammy Sawyer is also here. A lot of officials here. And as far as the charges, one more time, I'm going to go over it and you can double check me to make sure we're all right here. Tadarius Bean, not guilty on excessive force and duty to intervene, not guilty on failure to render aid, not guilty on conspiracy, but he was found guilty, Tadarius Bean, on obstruction. The same for Justin Smith, not guilty on failure to intervene, not guilty on excessive force, not guilty on conspiracy, but guilty on obstruction. Now, Demetrius Haley, who was seen in that video kicking Tyre and sending that picture of the bloody Tyre to several people, according to witnesses who testified, he was found guilty on all counts. A lesser included charge for excessive force and duty to intervene, and also a lesser included charge for that failure to render aid for bodily injury, but guilty on conspiracy and guilty on obstruction.
That's quite a list.
Oh yeah.
So the report just came to us that all three defendants are being taken into custody by the U.S. Marshals right now, and that the judge will discuss a motion for their release on Monday. So Judge Norris will be back in his courtroom on Monday, and we'll hear arguments on whether or not these men should be released. And they're going to be sentenced on January 22nd next year. So that's the very latest.
Right. I wonder if that will include the two former officers who pleaded guilty as well.
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Yeah,
that remains
that's a great question as well. Yeah, I also want to go ahead, Joe.
No, you go ahead.
I don't want to talk over you. I also want to mention that, I spoke with Tyre's parents exclusively before this trial started. I asked her what was her hope for this trial and for those 5 officers, and she told me that she wanted those 5 officers to go to hell. Well, they're going to jail, turns out. We're trying to figure out what their sentence will be, but that's what Tyre's mom told me. Every day of the trial, she would speak to me, and I would ask her how she was doing, and, it's been a tough time. Now, the family liaison is about to walk out of the courthouse. He may or may not speak. I'm waiting to see if Tyre's family will speak. But the family liaison, who's normally with Tyre's family, is walking out. I'm just going to give it a minute here, but if you have any questions, Joe or Kim, please feel free to go ahead and ask. But Tyre's mom has been here every day. The only day that she wasn't here was when she was in Washington, D.C. for the Congressional Black Caucus, when she wanted to keep Tyre's legacy alive. That was the first Friday of this trial. Again, this trial lasted 4 weeks, 19 days to be exact.
And I should note that this story keeps getting national and international coverage. When this story happened back in January of 2023, it was global news. It was the lead story that night on the BBC. That's something I pay attention to because I listen to find out what the world news is, what's happening around the world, and it took me aback to hear a Memphis story was the lead story across the world on the BBC. And so we see the family and attorneys coming out.
Justice for Tyre! Justice for Tyre!